attention, everybody. The next speaker is Richard Haynes from Capgemini. His presentation will start in 5 minutes in the main area. Richard is going to be talking about starting with citizens and communities. That's 5 minutes in the main presentation area.
Afternoon. Well, that was loud, I think. Can everyone hear me? All right? Excellent. So thanks for inviting me up here. It's been a bit of a blast from the past. I think I did some stuff with Angus about 4 years ago. And even more of a blast of the past was seeing Andrew, who I worked with 10 years ago, on an interesting project, but well, that's another one. So the purpose of this session, I wanted to kind of give you my take, I guess, on starting with citizens and communities, which just sounds really very obvious, particularly as you're a council and you always put the citizen and communities first. But I wanted to kind of talk through a notion of human-centered design and couple that with digital and then basically explain why I think a different approach to change and transformation can add a lot of value. Just in terms of who I am, so I work for Capgemini, and I don't know if you all know Capgemini, but it's a big French technology company. I have two boys called Max and Oliver. Max was named after Maximilien Robespierre, because I have a big thing about French revolutionaries. And Oliver was named after Oliver Cromwell, which gives you also a bit of a take. I didn't realize that naming them in that particular way would lead to the behaviors that I get off both those kids. But never mind. So I guess my take on this is that for years I've been working with local government and health organisations, focusing on helping them with being more efficient and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose I've come to recognise, and it was a bit of a brutal awareness when I joined Capgemini, that I've always been approaching this in somewhat the wrong way. And they introduced me to the concept of, Richard, you're always focusing on the money. You're always thinking about what you're doing internally, how you're cutting things down and taking out cost. But frankly, that's not a very good message. And ultimately, whenever you think about change, you need to think about the money and the magic. Because ultimately, the magic, which I think Andrew talked about earlier, is about the why. And you're only here really for citizens and communities. Unless we really have them at the heart of the way you approach change, ultimately nothing's going to be that different. And in fact, you get to a situation of a run to the bottom, where you just try and take out more and more cost, and ultimately the organisation breaks. So, why do I think this is kind of quite so relevant? I suppose in a world whereby kind of technology has become quite pervasive, we all know about social media and that kind of democratizing everyone's opinion. I think Donald Trump probably has made that particularly famous, as with Cambridge Analytica and its ability to influence all of us. But there's a recognition now that the way that, I suppose, people interact and what people expect of businesses and what people expect of each other and what they expect of public sector has shifted. There was a world whereby everything was, I suppose, much more organized for us. We were kind of told what we could buy, and that was determined by what was available in a shop. Or we were kind of directed on the holiday that we should have by going to the local, what do you call it, holiday shop. What are they called? I've forgotten the name of them. Travel agent, that's the one. And we've kind of moved to a model whereby, if I look at my children or even my generation and stuff, there is a view that now everyone's got far more right to actually voice their opinion of what they want, how they want things to work for them, that they want to be able to do whatever they want 24/7. They want to have endless choice. And of course, it's been enabled with businesses like Amazon have created these vast marketplaces where you can buy the most obscure item from the most obscure location and it'll still get to you within, a few days. And it's just not something that we've ever been able to see before. And it's starting to influence, obviously, the way that we look at politics, and it's influencing public services too, as people want choice and they want to be able to vote with their feet. Now, in a context of where you're trying to look at, I think it was mentioned, Margot mentioned it right at the very beginning, talking about the council doing less and citizens and communities taking on more. And fundamentally, you can only do that if you actually think about this from their perspective. So how is that going to work? You can't mandate it. You can't tell them you're going to run the libraries or you're going to start collecting all your own bins or whatnot. That's not really going to work. You have to create a mechanism whereby it works for the individual. It works for the user. And so user-centered design is fundamentally a principle of going out, engaging with citizens, and actually understanding their needs and their wants and thinking about the experience they want to have, and start thinking about things through their lens. And the shift in relationships for me, and I don't know if this all kind of resonates in terms of how you see businesses or what your kind of your attraction is or your loyalty are to kind of traditional businesses. But there was a way, I suppose, a period in time when the way that old companies always used to work was based on how long you were about. So we were established in 1792 or something like that. And that they did a good job. And because they did a good job and they've been here a long time, they had your loyalty. I suppose the shift now has basically been that the expectations are somewhat more complicated. People are bothered about the values or the principles that underpin an organization. They're interested in how well you support them and the nature of the kind of customer service. They're bothered about the choices that you have on offer and whether or not it's the kind of organization you actually want to either do business with or be supported by. And for me, all of this is hugely relevant in terms of thinking about the nature of what you want to be as a council. Now, I've kind of played a bit with your vision, so I hope you don't mind. I don't mind taking some liberties, do you? But I mean, basically, you articulated quite clearly you want this to be a great place to be. I think every council would want to articulate that you want to be a great place to be. I think the Bold Council said you didn't, but anyway. And obviously, you've articulated you want to build things around communities, that you want to work together to tackle inequalities, building self-resilient and self-reliant kind of communities around individuals and vulnerable people, which is all great stuff. None of that is, interestingly, about you. It's all about the world around you. And often when we talk about things like digital, or we talk about the way that we restructure our services, or the way that we reorganize our council, or the way that we reorganize services, and to be fair, I've been victim to this, having been a consultant to the sector for quite a long time, is you get very inward-looking. You get very focused on, how can I take cost out? You start thinking about, well, okay, at the moment we take through 170,000 calls a year. I don't want 170,000 calls. I'm going to close down my contact center. I'm going to get everyone to go do things on the web. Now, the challenge with all of these things, whether it be digital or the way that you decide you want to reshape the way you work, is that ultimately you can get to a situation of failure because no one else engages with you. If you believe these statements, and obviously, of course you do, of basically saying that you want to genuinely transform the quality of life in this place, and you want citizens and communities to play a different role, you have to look at it from their perspective and ask them, what do they want, given the fact that the reality of the situation is you've got a reducing pot of money. And you need to look at your services being delivered in a very different way. I ran a session not long ago, actually, with a council that was kind of grappling with their digital strategy and thinking about how they would really exploit digital and get people to do things more themselves. And they got, I think, about 150-odd projects in flight trying to tackle this. It was kind of a desperate spread of lots and lots of things. And they were complaining to me that the key challenge they've got is that when they've launched a new web app or a new kind of piece of functionality, no one seems to kind of really make use of it. None of it actually kind of doesn't land. And there was one council I worked with where they'd developed a digital marketplace for social care, enabling everyone to kind of make their own choices and decisions around where they spend their money. I think after having gone live for 6 months, they sold, I think, a walking stick and a chair. And so the question that was posed was kind of, why is that? Why is this not really kind of, why does it not really kind of worked? And also, when we are trying to change things, we never seem to really take out big sums of money. We don't make the step change that we kind of all hoped for. So we went through a process of actually just pondering, well, look, given where we are with technology today, and given the way that attitudes and mindsets have shifted, and given your objective that you want to kind of reduce your reliance on government grant and taxation, well, if you were to start with nothing, so imagine tomorrow there was imagine today there's no Angus Council, and tomorrow you had the job of actually delivering your statutory obligations and meeting the needs of people and delivering that vision. How exactly would you go about doing it? doing it? Would you start by putting an advert in the paper saying, calling, I want to recruit 6,500 people. I'm desperate need of a lot of teachers, a lot of people to empty bins. I need a load of social workers and stuff. I guess you could try that, but I reckon it would take quite a long time. Would you instinctively build lots of offices all over Angus to have lots of people in, which obviously they would take probably years for them to fill? Or would you actually think of a way of how can we try and tap into the resources, the businesses, the communities, the social capital that exists around us and connect what people need with people that are able to provide it? So literally around a kind of forging some kind of connection. And tapping into behaviors and influencing people is really at the heart of what human-centered design is about. An interesting one example of this for me that one of the team at Idean who focus on this gave me was to do with dropping litter. And in Denmark, they were getting to a point where they had a colossal problem with people just dropping litter, cigarette butts, and you name it, all over the place. So they decided to put yellow steps on the pavement towards bins. Sounds like a really bizarre kind of idea. They did lots of user research, and they discussed it with members of the public. They did this across the whole of Denmark, and bizarrely actually reduced waste, dropping litter in the street by 46%. Which isn't a kind of stat that I would have ever envisaged as being possible, but it actually happens if you put the effort by thinking about the way that individuals behave. Because fundamentally, we're humans, not machines. We don't tend to respond well by being told what to do. And I guess with this kind of way, if we think more about the needs of individuals or the needs of communities, and we want to, say, get them connecting with capacity that is around us, then what we've seen are lots of new business models, and they call them like platform businesses. In effect, just trying to connect one person who wants something with another person that needs it, and using technology to kind of facilitate that. And these are all kind of pretty obvious to you. Obviously, we've got Uber, and Uber went on from taxis, and they did Uber Christmas trees, and there's Uber kittens, and various other kind of things that they can do. And it's all about moving into this model of a gig economy. You've got people like Vitality Health, which is a private sector healthcare provider, and they went down a whole mechanism saying, well, we're going to incentivize you to live healthier lifestyles, and that will reduce your premiums. Okay? Various insurance companies have done that as well around things like driving insurance, car insurance, and basically monitoring how well you drive, and that influences the cost of your insurance. But then beyond that, there are whole movements out there of basically using social media or creating informal networks online to help people find each other or find people like them and support each other. And Health Unlocked, which is this organization, basically a kind of key example of that. So rather than saying, do we actually need to build a big piece of NHS infrastructure to kind of create these new big virtual communities? Well, there's capability that's already out there. What we probably need to do is tap into the resources and the energy and passion that exists already in communities. I guess then thinking about kind of closer to home with council-based services is then organisations like Home Touch, which is whereby, in effect, you can start to buy your care or support, which you organise and you pay for. But what they provide is a mechanism where the people that are providing that care are, in effect, quality assured. There's a degree of comfort around their ability to provide that emphasis. But it's all at a very much lower cost. It's moving away from, in effect, traditional business models whereby you say that we as a council must do this, or saying that we need to outsource it to somebody else. Instead, thinking about, what is the leaner, slicker way of making that work, enabling that connection between need and supply. And of course, we also had this already been referenced to the whole idea of using voice. One of the inherent challenges in given that I do a lot of work in adult social care and also in health, is a problem of digital exclusion, right? So, which is not everyone does have access to a laptop or to a tablet, or doesn't have connectivity, or they don't have the skills or whatnot to do that. And things are starting to change, obviously, with conversational commerce, with the use of voice. And even HMRC, which is a big Capgemini client, so I hope you all enjoy your experience when you interact with HMRC. It's probably one of the best, isn't it? It's better now than it's ever been. But they've kind of moved to the model of voice passports, so that when you phone up, you can authenticate using your voice, and then talking to, in effect, a robot, you can kind of get the support that you want, unless it gets too complicated, and then it obviously needs to be resolved by a person. But interestingly, I don't know if any of you have seen recently, there was a big launch, a kind of Google conference about a month ago, about a big investment that they've been making, which is, I think, really changing the whole user experience and the way that voice works, with a very kind of human type interaction. And I think we're getting to a point where, certainly over the next couple of years, we're going to find that this technology is so very cheap, and also is so interactive and so fluid that it's not going to be a barrier anymore. So we can stop worrying that, you know, the internet is something that's difficult to connect with, because the tools are becoming that much easier and more accessible to make use of. So I guess a kind of key question really is the kind of so what, right? The work that I've seen in quite a number of councils, if you take kind of key areas, so in, say, adult social care as a case in point, whereby people are starting to think about, I want people to be much more independent at home. And I don't want them to be so dependent on social workers making choices on their behalf. And they've gone down the route of creating things like marketplaces and all of those things. Because they also want to exploit things like the gig economy or personal assistance. They want to remove all the infrastructure that's wrapped around care and support and focus much more on outcomes and improving health and well-being. Those things kind of can't really work unless you do think genuinely about how that individual, that service user, will be able to make those choices, how they make use of these tools, what kind of support is going to exist around them. If you're going to talk about building things like community capacity and get people like you and me to go and help others and provide support for them, well, there's got to also be some kind of commercial basis for that, some kind of financial basis for making that work. You can't just expect it all to happen for free. So the key thing there as well is thinking about how do you devolve budget or devolve spend to individuals, or enable individuals to use their money within their own community to kind of start to incentivize and create economic development at a local level. And also, there's the other example where we use digital fundamentally to just simply transform a process or lean up a business process, which I know at Angus you're doing a lot of that already, aren't you, in terms of using digital to lean up. And there was one client I worked with where their bugbear was around responsive highways repairs. And they reckoned that when they looked at the balance between, I think using kind of Andrew's language, the kind of service fulfillment bucket versus all the rest of the infrastructure and the admin and the gubbins that kind of goes around that they reckon they spent about half the money was actually on, if you like, filling the pothole, for example, and about half of it was spent on checking whether or not the pothole was a real pothole, organizing whether or not someone should go and doing it, rekeying lots of information into lots of systems, and then when someone's gone and done the work, going and check whether or not they'd done the work that they should have done. Well, of course, the obvious thing with that then was just to simply say, well, can't we just trust members of the public that they're only probably going to say there's a pothole because there is one? And then why don't we just get them through an app or whatnot to just then go and get someone to go and fill the pothole? And let's have some trust in the people that have done that they've done it. And what the consequence of that, I think they managed to reduce the cost by something like 140 odd pounds a pothole. to getting on for about 65 quid. Leading to them, helping them to fill more potholes, of course, but also to save some money. But you can only make that process work, obviously, if you, A, challenge, if you like, all the infrastructure that you've created, all the barriers, all the cost of being in business between you and, or between what the person wants and how something is going to be fulfilled. And that's quite a radical way of challenging the way that you do business. And then thinking about how is it going to add value to the citizen? So what is in it for them? Why are they going to want to do it in this particular way? Which all sounds dead easy, right? But I don't think it is. So, because if it were really easily, then I guess everyone would have done it. And I guess having worked with local government for quite a long time, I've come to recognize that it's not always that rational or always that clear cut as to why things happen as they do. Where my parents live, the county council there decided that they went through a whole process of doing an analysis, for example, of libraries, their library service. And in their library service, I think they had about 60-odd libraries. And of those 60 libraries, about 40 of them were well used, and about 20 of them were not. And of those 20, there are about 5 of them that had an incredibly low footfall. One particular one, I think, had 5 individual users per annum, with a daily visit of 1. Okay. This was put forward to members, saying, look, we've got an evidence base, we've looked at the data, we've looked at what our users want and what they do, and it seems to us that our users don't value these libraries because they don't go there. So we think we should close them. And of course the members went, absolutely, they're all staying. No one's closing a library in my patch. These are all important. And so the members then, in their particular areas, then spoke to local communities and created a nice bit of fever and fervour and anxiety about these imminent closures. And in one particular place, where I believe there are about 3,000 people live, and this is the one that had the 5 unique users, basically a petition was developed with 10,000 people on that petition, all campaigning to keep this library open. It was quite interesting because the petition was actually gathered in a service station on a main trunk road between 2 cities. But anyway, the council went, fair enough, okay, you really want this library, we'll keep it running. But then they decided, no, actually wait, if you're really bothered about it, we will transfer it over to you. We'll give it to the community to run. You do this, you have it. Which is what they dutifully did. And 6 months later, it shut. But the key thing with it is, again, there's a dialogue, isn't there, in terms of the way we talk with members, that if we use the language of citizens and needs, and actually, what is it that they want? What is it they actually do? And we give some empirical evidence to kind of back that up. And also doing some decent user research. So we have stories and narratives that bring this to life. Then we must be in a better way or better chance of having that kind of conversation with members. But I don't for a minute think that, you know, there is bound to be room for change, right? There's also the issue around the relationship that you have with citizens and communities as well. So I don't know if you're aware of various authorities. There's one called the Wigan Deal. So Wigan Council created a thing called the Wigan Deal, which is in effect making a kind of, I suppose, a public pronouncement around the fact we need to interact differently. Yeah, we just don't have the money to do all the things that we used to do in the past. And we've got to be much more commercially savvy too. So we need to think about the way in which we generate funding from you for the services that we provide, particularly if maybe we need to kind of create value-added services that can kind of come with an additional revenue stream. But also, fundamentally, if you're not doing something, or you're not needing something, or you don't value something, we need to challenge whether or not we keep it. We've got to make some difficult kind of decisions. And having that dialogue is pretty fundamental in that. I mean, I think there's a thing at the moment, isn't there, about a certain bank that's decided they want to kind of close down lots of kind of regional, local branches, which again has kicked off a huge outcry about those branches. And the challenge there for me in that is all about the nature of the business model. We kind of want to shut down a traditional 1970s type branch in a locality. But if we focus more about the need and the fact that some people don't do internet banking or don't like doing things over the phone, then what's the different offer that could exist for a bank or for you around how you may make use of Costa, or how you make use of the library, or what do you offer in a leisure centre? And we've seen it with things like the post office being based in W.H. Smith's and all those kind of things, right? So it's how do you forge alliances? You don't have to have all the infrastructure yourself. Focus on the need and the quickest way of delivering what people want. And then I guess my last point is, I suppose, more about you and how you approach this. It's really easy, isn't it, to kind of get so stuck in the day-to-day of trying to make savings and running lots of different projects, constantly under pressure, kind of month on month, year on year, with watching the numbers, while also keeping the lights on with your frontline services. And I suppose the challenge really is, how do you kind of take breath? And opportunities like today are fantastic, aren't they? Of actually being able to step back and just, I think, just pose the question of, really, I'm here to serve, we're here to serve a purpose, yeah? We're there to meet the needs of the people outside and around us. Is there genuinely no other way? What is the best way of trying to do that? And being able to trial things as well. So do things on a small scale, and maybe getting things wrong, and recognizing that maybe the take-up isn't particularly good. Making mistakes, but doing it incrementally and learning from that, and then starting to scale it up. But doing it through the lens of thinking about, do we genuinely understand what citizens want, how they want to interact with you, so that you don't become an organization that spends lots of money on technology or changes that no one uses, and that basically become just a waste of money. So I think that's me.
Thank you, Richard. Richard's going to be here for at least another half hour, maybe hour, and would be absolutely delighted to have a chat with you, listen to your questions, challenges. So please come and have a chat with Richard. But once again, Richard Haynes, thank you.
Thanks.